Hey there, hi there, ho there, boys and girls. Are we live? I think we are. This is James J. Patterson coming to you live from the reading room at Allen Squire Publishing. Small press with big ideas. Anyway, had a little glitch getting started just now. Hope that wasn't distracting in any way. But uh, I've got special reading today. I'm going to read you about my two favorite feminists, and uh, and they're incredible women. And there are no biographies of these people that I can find. So all you young, hey Max, good to see you. Any of you young aspiring biographers out there, you should take note because I think it would be a great service and you might get a bestseller out of it. Anyway, uh, uh, I read a lot of history, and I probably read more history than anything else. I don't know why. I've just always been. I guess I do know why. When I was a kid, I was 9 years old or something when the 100th anniversary of the first shots fired in the American Civil War came about, the centennial, bicentennial, and well, what was it, one centennial? Anyway, uh, uh, and my father was a newspaper man. He was in distribution. And the Washington Post every Sunday in the 100th anniversary of the Civil War would devote the Outlook section, what was called then, to that week in the history of the Civil War. And there's this wonderful artist who did like squiggle drawings of everything. And his squiggle drawings of the soldiers and the battles and everything were captivating. And and so I pored over those, and the next thing I knew, I was reading books about the Civil War, and the next thing I knew, I was reading books about all the people in the Civil War, and the next thing I knew, I was a history buff for the rest of my life. And they always come in great big fat books that take forever to read. Um, but today I'm going to read to you about two women that changed my life. One is Bertha Von Sunder. Uh, she was a peacenik, and she dedicated her life to getting the rich and the powerful to just outlaw war altogether. And then the other is a famous actress from France in the 16, 1700s, Adrienne Lecouvreur. And if you're an old Pheromone fan, you'll know that the Pheromones wrote a song about Adrienne, and we put it on our So Far So What album. And one of these days, I'm going to dig it up and throw it on here somewhere, and you can listen to it. But anyway, I'm going to start with Bertha von Suttner right now, and I want to just say out loud and in person that I am not qualified to tell you who is and who is not a feminist. I'm just not. But when I think of feminism, I think of these two people, and so maybe you can. You'll get no mansplaining from me, and that's all. And I'm devoted to that. Anyway, so I'm going to read you a little bit about Bertha von Suttner. And this is from Margaret Macmillan, is one of my favorite historians, and she's Canadian, and she wrote this book, The War That Ended Peace. And look at this, Jesus, uh, and uh, and it's about the run-up to World War One, and she has a unique take on it. Her take on it is, and there's a chapter called this, "What Were They Thinking?" She'll say in here that Napoleon had been defeated in 1815. So why and between then and 1914, 100 years, there had been a couple of dust-ups with Prussia and whatnot, but there had been no mass-scale slaughters, no big wars, and in that amount of time, because there was a cessation in hostilities for that length of time, the arts flourished, sciences flourished, culture progressed, literacy was rampant, and it was pretty good. So what the hell were they thinking? Well, I think she concludes that they weren't thinking. Or they weren't thinking with their brains and with their hearts, that's for sure. So here we come, Bertha von Suttner. And before I read, I have one more thing. Do you think it's possible to fall in love with someone who died 106 years ago? Because I fell in love with Bertha von Suttner. Okay. The chapter you'll find Bertha in is called Dreaming of Peace. In 1875, Countess Bertha Kinsky, a forceful and lovely but impoverished young woman, was obliged to take a post as a governess with the von Suttner family in Vienna. The story was not an unusual one for unmarried but well-educated women, nor was it strange when one of those sons of the house fell in love with her and she with him. His parents, however, opposed the marriage. To begin with, she was 7 years older than their son. More importantly, she was penniless, and although she carried the name of one of the most ancient of all Czech families, the circumstances of her birth had caused something of a scandal. Her mother was middle class, not noble, and was some 50 years younger than her husband, a general. The child was never really accepted by her grand relations, who sometimes referred to her as a bastard. While she rejected much of her background during her adult life and became, by the standards of her class, a daring freethinker and radical, she kept much of its style, including a certain insouciance towards money. Once her romance was discovered, it was clearly impossible for her to go on living in the household in Vienna, so she impulsively left for Paris to take up a post as private secretary to a rich Swedish manufacturer, Alfred Nobel. It was the start, although neither of them knew it at the time, of a partnership in the cause for peace. She stayed with him only for a few months, and then, following her heart, returned to Vienna and eloped with Bertha Von Sunder. The couple made their way to the Caucasus in Russia, where they lived from hand to mouth until Bertha discovered that she had a talent for writing, both books and short pieces for German language publications. Arthur, who seemed to have been a much less forceful and energetic character, gave French and writing lessons. Okay. She also discovered firsthand the horrors of war, when a conflict between Russia and Turkey, which involved fighting in the Caucasus as well as in the Balkans, broke out in 1877. By the time she and Arthur made their way back to Vienna in 1885, Bertha had become convinced that war must be made obsolete. In 1889, she published her first famous work, Lay Down Your Arms, a heartrending and melodramatic story of a young woman of noble birth, whose tribulations include financial ruin, cholera, and the loss of her first husband in battle. She remarries only to see her new husband go off to war in a conflict between Austria-Hungary and Prussia. Defying her relatives, she goes in search of him and sees for herself the ghastly condition of the wounded after the Prussian victory. She is reunited with her husband, but unfortunately they find themselves in Paris during the Franco-Prussian War, and he is shot by the Commune. Deep convictions, but untalented, was Tolstoy's conclusion when he read the novel. Nevertheless, it enjoyed a great success and was translated into several languages, including English. Its sales gave its author, at least temporarily, funds to support herself, her family, and her unending and indefatigable work for peace. She was a great publicist and a superb lobbyist. In 1904, President Teddy Roosevelt gave her a reception at the White House. She persuaded the rich, among them the Prince of Monaco and the American industrialist Andrew Carnegie, to support her work. Her most important patron of all was her old friend and employer, Nobel. His fortune was based on his patenting and production of new and more powerful explosives and dynamite, which had immediate application for mining, but which was, in the longer run, to add to the increasingly greater destructiveness of modern weapons. I wish, he once said to Suttner, I could produce a substance or a machine of such frightful efficacy for wholesale devastation that wars should therefore and thereafter become altogether impossible. When he died in 1896, he left part of his considerable fortune to endow a peace prize. Suttner, who was yet again in financial difficulties, turned her lobbying talents to the prize, and in 1905 she was awarded it. In her views, she was very much a product of the confident 19th century with its trust in science, rationality, and progress. Surely, she thought, Europeans would be made to see how pointless and stupid war was. Struggle was not inevitable. Evolution towards a better, more peaceful society was. Peace, she wrote, is a condition that the progress of civilization will bring about by necessity. It is a mathematical certainty that in the course of centuries, the warlike spirit will witness a progressive decline. If only, huh? Suttner did not much care for socialists. In general, relations between the largely middle-class peace movement and the socialists were difficult in the decades before 1914. The upper and middle classes were scared off by the revolutionary rhetoric, and the socialists tended to regard liberals as the kindly face of capitalism, helping to mask its true nature from the workers. When it came to issues of peace, the socialists had little patience for issues dear to the anti-war liberals, such as arbitration and disarmament. What was more important was to overthrow capitalism, which was seen as the cause of war. Sounding any familiar to you in any way? Just a little more. Bertha Von Sunder in her diary said, "Nothing but mutual suspicions, accusations, and agitations. Well, that is an adequate chorus for the increasing cannons, the airplanes, which are testing dropping bombs, and for war ministries, which always demand more. She died the week before Franz Ferdinand. Ferdinand was assassinated in Sarajevo. And she was an international activist, and in Germany, she helped organize a thing that got 1 million signatures in just a few weeks to disarm. And when Kaiser Wilhelm read it, he said, "That's a nice thing. I think I'll take a shit on it." Does he remind you of anybody? All right. Then a little more. What do I do with it? There it is. Liberals and the left, as well as the peace movement, attacked the arms race and its merchants of death at the time and after the Great War. It was singled out as one of the main factors, perhaps indeed the key one, in bringing about the catastrophe. In 1934, Senator Gerald Nye of North Dakota chaired a special Senate committee to investigate the role of the arms manufacturers in creating the Great War, and showed that war and preparation for war is not a matter of national honor or national defense, but a matter of profit for the few. Bertha was very charismatic, and she didn't believe in creating great movements and getting 1 million people. She tried that. What she thought was go to the guys who are making the wars and talk them out of it. She also categorically abjured the notion that man represented Mars and woman Venus. She energetically militated against the battle of the sexes or the identification with pacifism and feminism. She called for a Lysistrata boycott, and that means no sex, no love until you stop fighting. I've seen that put on Facebook a few times, and I think it may start getting a little more traction. Anyway, so that's my love, Bertha Von Sunder. She was kind of beautiful, if you ask me. But and one last thing about Bertha, she labored against these what she called self-fulfilling prophecies. 1, wars are ordained by God, who is himself the Lord of hosts. 2, there have always been wars, and consequently, there will always be wars. 3, mankind without this occasional decimation would increase at too great a rate. 4, continual peace relaxes, effeminates, produces, like stagnant water, corruption, especially the degeneration of morals. God, that peace is an awful thing, isn't it? 5, wars are the best means for putting in practice self-sacrifice, heroism, and to shore up the firmer elements of character. Yeah, ask Vietnam vets, how their character was bolstered and firmed up by going to Vietnam. 6, men will always contend. Perfect agreement in all their views is impossible. Divergent interests must always be impinging on each other. Consequently, everlasting peace is a contradiction in terms. Yeah, that peace. Now those I can't stand it. Well, that's Bertha. Go look her up. And by the way, like I said, there's no biography of her, and I think that's criminally negligent, and I think somebody out there ought to get to work on that. All right, how are we doing? It took a little longer than I thought. Okay, now another big, massive tome where you find all these wonderful people. The beautiful thing about a giant survey of a historical era is that you're going to meet dozens and dozens and dozens of people that you really should meet. Okay, so now Adrienne Lecouvreur. Adrienne, tender is the art of love. All right, now she was great friends with Voltaire, who's another one of my heroes. And he had been petitioning society, the courts, rich people, whoever would listen, to reform the theater. And what he meant when he wanted to reform the theater was, rich people would, and nobles and dignitaries and stuff, would demand to have a seat on the stage. And what we now call the orchestra was a place that was just reserved for wealthy people who wanted to be seen, right? And so you couldn't really act out, the killing of Julius Caesar or any of these wonderful theatrical things because there was no room on the stage. So the theater devolved into kind of an oratorical thing. Well, he put a stop to that. Well, because he was a playwright and he had his own theater in his own Vincennes, just outside the borders of France, where he had to self-quarantine once in a while, so he didn't get his head cut off. So here we're going to go, okay? Voltaire had little success in his campaign to improve the theological status of actors. He had success in reforming what was going on the stage, but there was a little problem. Socially, their condition had improved. They were received in aristocratic homes, and in many cases they played at royal command. But the church still condemned the theater as a school for scandal, held all actors as to ipso facto excommunication, and forbade their burial in consecrated ground, which included every cemetery in Paris. Voltaire pointed out the contradiction. Actors are paid wages by the king and excommunicated by the church. They are ordered by the king to play every evening and forbidden to play at all by ritual. If they do not play, they are put into prison. If they do play, they are cast into the sewers after death. If they play, they are cast into the sewers. We delight to live with them and object to be buried with them. We admit them to our tables and close our cemeteries to them. Adrienne Lecouvreur, the greatest French actress of her time, illustrated these antitheses in her life and death. Born near Reims in 1692, she came to Paris at the age of 10, living near the Théâtre Français. She found her way into it frequently and imitated at home the tragedians whom she admired from the parterre. At 14, she organized a company of amateurs, which performed on private stages. The actor Legrand gave her lessons and secured a place for her in a troupe acting in Strasbourg. For years, like Molière, she played in the provinces, passing from role to role, and doubtless from one romance to another. Longing for love, she found only lectures. 2 of them in succession left her pregnant and refused her marriage. At 18, she bore a daughter. At 24, another. By 1715, she went back to Paris, for young Voltaire met her there, and then, for a time, something more than a friend. In 1717, she was the leading lady at the Théâtre Français, the haunt and aspiration of her youth. Like many famous actresses, she was not particularly beautiful. She was rather stout, and her features were irregular, but she had an indescribable grace and carriage and manners, a seductive music in her voice, a light of fire and feeling in her dark eyes, a mobile and noble expression on her face. Her every action expressed personality. She refused to follow the oratorical style of speech that had been made traditional in French acting by the long rectangular form of the early theaters. She resolved to act her part and speak her lines as naturally on the boards as in real life, except for the distinct articulation and added volume of voice needed to carry her words to the farthest auditors. In her brief career, she accomplished a revolution in histrionic art. This was founded also in her depth of feeling, her capacity to convey the passion and tenderness of love, the full pathos of terror of a tragic scene. She excelled in the difficult art of listening actively and expressively while others spoke. Old men praised her, youths lost their hearts and wits over her. Young Charles Augustin de Ferrol, Comte d'Argentat, who was to be the angel and agent of Voltaire, developed for her an ardor that alarmed his mother, who, fearing that he would promise marriage and be accepted, vowed to send him to the colonies. When Adrienne heard of this, she wrote to Madame de Ferrol, March 22, 1721, assuring her that she would discourage the youth's addresses. She was right. D'Argental rose to be a councillor in the Parliament of Paris. In July 1729, Simone Boret Abbé and painter of miniatures, informed Mademoiselle Lecouvreur that two masked agents of a court lady had proposed him to give the actress some poison pills, for which service he was to receive 6,600 livres. Adrienne notified the police. They arrested the abbé and questioned him severely. He stuck to his story. In February 1730, Mademoiselle Lecouvreur began to suffer from a diarrhea that grew daily worse. She continued her roles in the theater, but early in March she had to be carried from the theater in a faint. On March 15th, with her last strength, she played Jocaste in Voltaire's Oedipe. On the 17th, she took to her bed, bleeding mortally from inflammation of the bowels. Only Voltaire and d'Argentel attended her in this tragic and humiliating end, and she died on March 20th in Voltaire's arms. She was 36. And she was right. D'Argentel rose to be Councillor of Parliament in Paris. In his 85th year, going through the papers his mother had left, he came upon this letter, of which he had known nothing before. And it was from Adrienne Lecouvreur to his mother. Madame, I will write to him whatever you please. I will never see him again, if you desire it. But do not threaten to send him to the end of the world. He can be useful to his country. He can be the delight of his friends. He will crown you with satisfaction and fame. You have only to guide his talents and let his virtues act. In his 85th year, going through the papers of his mother, he came upon the letter of which he had known nothing before. What a story that is. Adrienne Lecouvreur, I've never been able to find a portrait of her. There's no biography of her either. I think you all ought to get to work. And, these women had a hands-on approach to their love lives. And I think that might have been a little bit of a problem for male biographers the last couple of hundred years. But I don't think that's a problem anymore. I think women should write these biographies, and I think they should be upfront about it and give us the word, huh? Anyway, that's my little song and dance for today. What we got out here? I don't know, everybody. All right. James J. Patterson live from the reading room at Allen Squire Publishing. Those are my two favorite feminists, and I'm sticking to it. I'll be back next week. Get on over and see Rose Solari's got a special reading she's going to do for you on Wednesday at 4 o'clock. Yeah, she's going to, and it's have something to do with some of this awfulness that's going on right now. And hey, Wes, I see you found Adrienne. Yeah, she was good looking. All right. You guys hang in there, and don't forget, I'll be back next Monday. Go see Rose on Wednesday, and check out Willie Porter at 8 p.m. Eastern on his page. Neil Daly. All right? That's all you get. Next time.